The Oquan River flowed icy cold that October morning in 1847, carrying the smell of decaying leaves and something worse, something metallic that twisted Ayana's stomach before she even reached the bank. She had come at first light to check her fishing nets, as she did every morning, slipping through the Georgia woods with the quiet her grandmother had taught her. Fog clung low over the water, thick like wool, and she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Then she saw the body. It drifted face down among the reeds, one arm snagged in the twisted roots of a cypress tree. The current tugged at it softly, steadily, as if the river could not decide whether to hold on or let it go. Ayana stopped on the muddy shore, her bare feet sinking into the wet earth. At first she thought it was a deer. Hunters sometimes left carcasses behind, but then she noticed the ripped cloth of a shirt, the dark skin of a human back, and the clear bloom of fresh blood spreading through the water like spilled ink. She should have turned away. That was what her uncle would have said. That was what any sensible person would have done. A body meant trouble, white man's trouble. Ayana had stayed alive alone in these woods for 3 years because she knew how to stay clear of trouble. But something about the way the man's fingers still clutched the root, even while unconscious, pulled her forward. She stepped into the river. The cold stabbed her legs as she went deeper, her deerskin dress floating around her thighs. She reached him and struggled to roll him over, gasping as his face broke the surface. "Tell me in the comments which country you are from and what you thought of this story. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss future stories." He was younger than she had expected, maybe 25, with a strong jaw and scars crossing his shoulders like a record of pain. A bullet wound yawned just below his collarbone, still bleeding slowly into the river. His eyes were shut, his lips blue, but when she pressed her fingers to his neck, she felt it, a pulse, faint but stubborn. He was alive. Ayana glanced around wildly, her heart pounding. The woods were empty, the morning birds only just starting to sing. No one had followed him here yet, but they would. Men like this did not end up in rivers by chance. She knew what he was before she noticed the iron collar hidden under the water, cracked and smeared with dried blood. A runaway, a slave. If she helped him, if anyone discovered it, they would hang her from the nearest tree without hesitation. She locked her arms under his and began to pull. He was heavy, limp against the current, and twice she almost lost her grip. Her muscles burned as she dragged him onto the shore, his body leaving a dark streak through the mud. She dropped to her knees beside him, breathing hard, and pressed her hands against the wound in his chest. Blood pushed between her fingers, hot and urgent. He needed a healer, someone who understood bullets, fever, and infection. But there was no healer. There was only her, a Cherokee woman living in exile at the edge of a world that wanted her dead just as much as it wanted him chained. "Foolish," she murmured to herself in Cherokee, her grandmother's tongue, the one she used only when alone. "This is foolish, Ayana." Still, her hands kept moving. She tore a strip from her dress and tied the wound tight, then checked his breathing. Shallow but steady. His skin was cold, his body trembling from shock, and she knew if she left him there, he would be dead by noon, from the wound or from the men who would come searching. She thought of her cabin, hidden half a mile into the woods, tucked so deep among the pines that even hunters rarely stumbled upon it. She thought of the dried herbs hanging from her beams, the poultices her grandmother had taught her to make, the warm fire that never went out in her hearth. She remembered the last time she had trusted a stranger that had been 3 years earlier, when soldiers came to force her people west, in what they called Indian removal. She had watched her mother die on the trail, seen her father fall in the snow, seen her younger brother dragged away when he tried to flee. Ayana survived only because she slipped away one night, disappearing into the Carolina mountains before finally reaching this forgotten corner of Georgia, where no one cared about one Cherokee woman living alone. She had sworn then never to risk herself for anyone again. Survival meant being alone. Survival meant staying silent. Yet she looked down at the man's face, slack with unconsciousness, and felt her chest tighten. He had fought. Even now, broken and bleeding, his body showed resistance, the scars, the shattered collar, the gunshot that proved he had refused his chains. She had seen that same fire in her brother's eyes the night he ran. She saw it in her own reflection every morning. "Damn you," she whispered in English, the language of her enemies, the language taught by missionaries who claimed to save her plea. before betraying them. "Damn you for making me remember." She slid her arms beneath his shoulders again and started dragging him toward the forest. Every few steps she had to stop and breathe, her back aching, her arms shaking. The woods slowly closed around them, first pines, then oaks, then thick brush that scraped her legs. She moved on instinct, following hidden paths she had carved over 3 years, trails that looked like animal tracks to anyone else. The man groaned once, a low sound that made her pause, but his eyes stayed shut. She kept going. By the time she reached her cabin, the sun was high, burning away the fog and painting the forest gold and green. The cabin was small, barely one room with a stone fireplace and a bed of furs, but it was hers. She had built it herself, cutting logs and sealing gaps with mud and moss. It sat in a tiny clearing ringed with blackberry bushes and wild grapevines, unseen unless you knew where to look. She pulled the man inside and laid him on the furs, then went to work. She fed the fire until it roared, filled a pot with rainwater, and took down bundles of dried herbs, yarrow for bleeding, golden seal for infection, willow bark for fever. Her hands worked with calm skill, grinding and mixing, her grandmother's voice echoing in her thoughts with lessons passed through generations. She cleaned the wound with hot water and packed it with a paste that made the man jerk, his body reacting to pain even in darkness. As she worked, she studied him closely. He was tall and strong despite clear hunger, with hands rough and scarred from hard labor. His face was handsome in a way that made her uneasy to notice, strong nose, full lips, a jaw set with pride, even in defeat. But his back told the true story. When she rolled him to check for other injuries, she saw the web of scars covering him from shoulders to waist, whip marks, dozens of them, layered year upon year. Some were old and pale, others newer and raised. She had seen scars like these on escaped slaves who passed through Cherokee lands when she was young, but never so many, never so cruel. "What did you do," she whispered, tracing one deep scar with her finger, "to make them hate you this much?" He did not answer. He lay still except for the shallow rise of his chest, his body fighting a battle she could not see. She covered him with a blanket woven from rabbit fur and sat back, suddenly drained. The weight of her choice hit her hard. She had taken in a runaway slave. In Georgia, that crime was worse than murder. If they found him, they would burn her cabin, hang him, and likely hang her beside him. Even if he lived, what then? He could not stay. He could not go back. She could not send him wounded into the woods. She had trapped herself. Outside, a crow cried 3 times, a warning. Ayana moved to the small window covered with oiled cloth and looked out. Nothing stirred in the clearing. The morning looked calm, butterflies floating over blackberry bushes, a mockingbird singing from an oak. But she knew peace was never lasting in the south. Violence always returned. She turned back to the man on her floor, a stranger with no name, whose life she had chosen to save for reasons she barely understood. He looked smaller now, weaker, his face tight with fever. She knelt and placed a cool cloth on his head, checking his pulse, still weak, still fighting. "Oh, had better be worth this," she whispered, knowing he could not hear, knowing it did not matter. "You had better live, because I risked everything for you." His eyes moved beneath closed lids, fast and restless, lost in dreams she could not follow. She wondered what he saw there, his past, his escape, the moment the bullet tore into his chest. She wondered if he dreamed of freedom, or if, like her, he had learned that freedom was just another word for running. As morning stretched into afternoon, Ayana worked without words, changing bandages, easing water between his lips, watching the fever that made his skin burn like fire. The Oquan River flowed icy cold that October morning in 1847, carrying the smell of decaying leaves and something worse, something metallic that twisted Ayana's stomach before she even reached the bank. She had come at first light to check her fishing nets, as she did every morning, slipping through the Georgia woods with the quiet her grandmother had taught her. Fog clung low over the water, thick like wool, and she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Then she saw the body. It drifted face down among the reeds, one arm snagged in the twisted roots of a cypress tree. The current tugged at it softly, steadily, as if the river could not decide whether to hold on or let it go. Ayana stopped on the muddy shore, her bare feet sinking into the wet earth. At first she thought it was a deer. Hunters sometimes left carcasses behind, but then she noticed the ripped cloth of a shirt, the dark skin of a human back, and the clear bloom of fresh blood spreading through the water like spilled ink. She should have turned away. That was what her uncle would have said. The T was what any sensible person would have done. A body meant trouble, white man's trouble. Ayana had stayed alive alone in these woods for 3 years because she knew how to stay clear of trouble. But something about the way the man's fingers still clutched the root, even while unconscious, pulled her forward. She stepped into the river. The cold stabbed her legs as she went deeper, her deerskin dress floating around her thighs. She reached him and struggled to roll him over, gasping as his face broke the surface. Tell me in the comments which country you are from and what you thought of this story. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss future stories. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 25, with a strong jaw and scars crossing his shoulders like a record of pain. A bullet wound yawned just below his collarbone, still bleeding slowly into the river. His eyes were shut, his lips blue, but when she pressed her fingers to his neck she felt it, a pulse, faint but stubborn. He was alive. Ayana glanced around wildly, her heart pounding. The woods were empty, the morning birds only just starting to sing. No one had followed him here yet, but they would. Men like this did not end up in rivers by chance. She knew what he was before she noticed the iron collar hidden under the water, cracked and smeared with dried blood. A runaway, a slave. If she helped him, if anyone discovered it, they would hang her from the nearest tree without hesitation. She locked her arms under his and began to pull. He was heavy, limp against the current, and twice she almost lost her grip. Her muscles burned as she dragged him onto the shore. S body leaving a dark streak through the mud. She dropped to her knees beside him, breathing hard, and pressed her hands against the wound in his chest. Blood pushed between her fingers, hot and urgent. He needed a healer, someone who understood bullets, fever, and infection, but there was no healer. There was only her, a Cherokee woman living in exile at the edge of a world that wanted her dead just as much as it wanted him chained. Foolish, she murmured to herself in Cherokee, her grandmother's tongue, the one she used only when alone. This is foolish, Ayana. Still, her hands kept moving. She tore a strip from her dress and tied the wound tight, then checked his breathing. Shallow, but steady. His skin was cold, his body trembling from shock, and she knew if she left him there, he would be dead by noon, from the wound or from the men who would come searching. She thought of her cabin, hidden half a mile into the woods, tucked so deep among the pines that even hunters rarely stumbled upon it. She thought of the dried herbs hanging from her beams, the poultices her grandmother had taught her to make, the warm fire that never went out in her hearth. She remembered the last time she had trusted a stranger that had been 3 years earlier when soldiers came to force her people west in what they called Indian removal. She had watched her mother die on the trail, seen her father fall in the snow, seen her younger brother dragged away when he tried to flee. Ayana survived only because she slipped away one night, disappearing into the Carolina mountains before finally reaching this forgotten corner of Georgia, where no one cared about one Cherokee woman living alone. She had sworn then never to risk herself for anyone again. Survival meant being alone. Survival meant staying silent. Yet she looked down at the man's face, slack with unconsciousness, and felt her chest tighten. He had fought. Even now, broken and bleeding, his body showed resistance, the scars, the shattered collar, the gunshot that proved he had refused his chains. She had seen that same fire in her brother's eyes the night he ran. She saw it in her own reflection every morning. "Damn you," she whispered in English, the language of her enemies, the language taught by missionaries who claimed to save her people before betraying them. "Damn you for making me remember." She slid her arms beneath his shoulders again and started dragging him toward the forest. Every few steps she had to stop and breathe, her back aching, her arms shaking. The woods slowly closed around them, first pines, then oaks, then thick brush that scraped her legs. She moved on instinct, following hidden paths she had carved over 3 years, trails that looked like animal tracks to anyone else. The man groaned once, a low sound that made her pause, but his eyes stayed shut. She kept going. By the time she reached her cabin, the sun was high, burning away the fog and painting the forest gold and green. The cabin was small, barely one room with a stone fireplace and a bed of furs, but it was hers. She had built it herself, cutting logs and sealing gaps with mud and moss. It sat in a tiny clearing ringed with blackberry bushes and wild grapevines, unseen unless you knew where to look. She pulled the man inside and laid him on the furs, then went to work. She fed the fire until it roared, filled a pot with rainweight, and took down bundles of dried herbs, yarrow for bleeding, golden seal for infection, willow bark for fever. Her hands worked with calm skill, grinding and mixing, her grandmother's voice echoing in her thoughts with lessons passed through generations. She cleaned the wound with hot water and packed it with a paste that made the man jerk, his body reacting to pain even in darkness. As she worked, she studied him closely. He was tall and strong despite clear hunger, with hands rough and scarred from hard labor. His face was handsome in a way that made her uneasy to notice. Strong nose, full lips, a jaw set with pride even in defeat. But his back told the true story. When she rolled him to check for other injuries, she saw the web of scars covering him from shoulders to waist, whip marks, dozens of them, layered year upon year. Some were old and pale, others newer and raised. She had seen scars like these on escaped slaves who passed through Cherokee lands when she was young, but never so many, never so cruel. "What did you do?" she whispered, tracing one deep scar with her finger, "to make them hate you this much?" He did not answer. He lay still except for the shallow rise of his chest, his body fighting a battle she could not see. She covered him with a blanket, woven from rabbit fur, and sat back, suddenly drained. The weight of her choice hit her hard. She had taken in a runaway slave. In Georgia, that crime was worse than murder. If they found him, they would burn her cabin, hang him, and likely hang her beside him. Even if he lived, what then? He could not stay. He could not go back. She could not send him wounded into the woods. She had trapped herself. Outside, a crow cried 3 times, a warning. Ayanna moved to the small window covered with oiled cloth and looked out. Nothing stirred in the clearing. The morning looked calm. Butterflies floating over blackberry bushes, a mockingbird singing from an oak, but she knew peace was never lasting in the South. Violence always returned. She turned back to the man on her floor, a stranger with no name, whose life she had chosen to save for reasons she barely understood. He looked smaller now, weaker, his face tight with fever. She knelt and placed a cool cloth on his head, checking his pulse, still weak, still fighting. "You had better be worth this," she whispered, knowing he could not hear, knowing it did not matter. "You had better live, because I risked everything for you." His eyes moved beneath closed lids, fast and restless, lost in dreams she could not follow. She wondered what he saw there, his past, his escape, the moment the bullet tore into his chest. She wondered if he dreamed of freedom, or if, like her, he had learned that freedom was just another word for running. As morning stretched into afternoon, Ayanna worked without words, changing bandages, easing water between his lips, watching the fever that made his skin burn like fire. Evening came, but something between them had changed, quietly and without warning. A thin, new understanding rested in the space between them, fragile but real, shaped by shared loss and shared resistance. They were 2 people who had every reason not to trust one another, brought together by chance, fear, and need. Yet in the soft, flickering firelight, watching each other across the small cabin, they began to notice something they both believed had disappeared forever. They began to feel hope. Outside, the forest slipped into its nighttime patterns. Owls called from unseen branches, small creatures moved through leaves and brush, and the distant song of the Yukon River flowed endlessly south. Somewhere out there, hidden by darkness, men with dogs and guns kept searching, following broken paths and wrong signs, drawing closer with every passing day. But for now, inside this small cabin buried deep among the pines, 2 outcasts found a short moment of safety, and for the moment, that was enough. The days that followed formed a rhythm neither of them expected. Samuel's body, though worn and marked by old and new wounds, proved stronger than it looked. By the end of the first week, he could sit up on his own. By the second week, he could walk from one end of the cabin to the other, though it left him pale and gasping for air. Ayanna watched his recovery with the careful eye of a healer. She changed his bandages twice a day, checked the wound for swelling or heat, and adjusted her mixtures when needed. But something else was happening as well, something neither of them spoke about. In the tight space of the cabin, With nothing but time and silence pressing in, they began to talk. It began simply. Samuel asked about the plants she used, and she explained how golden seal helped fight infection, how willow bark eased pain and fever, how her grandmother had taught her to read the forest like words on a page. He listened closely, his eyes following her hands as she worked. At times he shared what he knew too. He had learned about plants from an old woman on the Thornton plantation, the closest thing the enslaved people had to a doc. Tor. We called her Aunt May, Samuel said one afternoon, while Ayana crushed dried mint leaves in a stone bowl. She was near 80, blind in one eye, but she could heal almost anything. She saved my life more than once when I was a boy. What happened to her? Ayana asked, not lifting her eyes. She died about 5 years ago. Natural causes, that was a mercy. She used to say healing wasn't just about the plants, but about knowing which ones worked together. She said everything in nature was connected, and if you listened, the forest would tell you what it needed. Ayana smiled faintly. My grandmother said the same thing. She believed the trees, rivers, and animals all spoke the same language, and humans had forgotten how to hear it. Maybe that's why we're in such trouble, Samuel said, too busy talking to listen. She looked at him then, surprised. He sat on the edge of the pallet, his chest bare so she could check the wound later. In the afternoon light coming through the window, she could see how much he had healed. His fever-pale skin had color again. The hollowness in his face was fading from her steady meals. He looked stronger, more alive, and dangerously close to being ready to leave. The thought unsettled her more than she expected. Tell me about Mon, she said, steering the talk away. What was it like there? Samuel's face darkened. You really want to know? I asked, didn't I? He went quiet for a long moment, eyes fixed on nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was slow and controlled. The Thornton plantation covered about 2,000 acres, mostly cotton. Richard Thornton owned around 150 people, men, women, children. We worked from before sunrise to after dark, 6 days a week. Sundays we rested, but only because even white men respect God's day. He let out a bitter laugh. Though I don't know what kind of God would allow that place to exist. Ayana stopped working and looked at him. The woman you mentioned, Sarah, what happened to her? The same thing that happens to most young women. Thornton's son, James, he chose them when they came of age, said it was his right as master. Sarah was different though, proud, educated. Her previous owner taught her to read and write. James hated that. He didn't like slaves who thought they were human. Samuel's hands tightened into fists. I heard her every night, heard what he did to her, and I couldn't just stay still. So you hit him, Ayana said quietly. I did more than that. I broke his jaw, maybe his nose too, left him bleeding while Sarah ran. I don't know if she escaped. I hope she did. He met her eyes. Do you think that makes me a bad man using violence? I think it makes you human, she said. And I think sometimes violence is the only language evil understands. They held each other's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. Both were shaped by violence. Both had survived it. Both refused to bow to it. And in that moment, Ayana realized how dangerous this had become. Not the danger of hiding a runaway, but the danger of caring. She turned back to her work, focusing on the steady scrape of stone. Still, she could feel Samuel watching her, could sense the questions he held back. Can I ask you something? He said at last. You're going to anyway. Why stay here? He gestured around the cabin. Why stay Cherokee land, in Georgia, and you could have gone somewhere safer? Ayana set the bowl down and walked to the window. The forest outside hummed with late-day life. Birds settled in for night, squirrels argued, and wind whispered through pine needles. This is my home, she said. Not the cabin, the land. My people lived here for thousands of years. My grandmother was born not far from here. My great-grandmother is buried under an oak tree I can reach in an hour. How could I leave? But you're alone. Alone is better than being erased. She faced him. The ones who went west, the ones who survived the march, they're in Oklahoma now. They call it Indian Territory. But it isn't ours. It's just another place we were allowed to exist. I chose to stay and hide rather than leave and forget. That makes more sense than you know, Samuel said softly. I thought about freedom every day on the plantation, going north, starting new. But then I'd think about who I'd leave behind. My mother, my sister Lily, friends who were closer than blood. How do you run when part of you is still trapped? But you ran, I did, and I wonder every day if that makes me a coward or a survivor. Ayana thought carefully. Survival always costs something. We both gave up connection to stay alive. That doesn't make us weak. It means we knew what we couldn't survive. Samuel nodded. Silence settled between them, easy and shared. Outside, shadows stretched long, and Ayana noticed how late it had grown. She moved to prepare dinner. Rabbit stew again, wild onions, acorn bread she had baked earlier. As she worked, Samuel watched her openly. You do everything yourself. Hunt, cook, build, heal. Who else would? That's impressive. I worked fields my whole life. Cotton, tobacco, whatever was needed. I could pick 500 pounds in a day, but put me in a forest and I'd be lost. Then it's good I found you in the river, Ayana said with a small smile, the first real one she had given in years. Samuel smiled back, and something warm and dangerous passed between them. Ayana felt it rise in her chest, a flutter she thought was long gone. She turned away quickly, hands shaking as she stirred the pot. They ate as the sun sank, filling the cabin with red and gold light. Samuel fed himself easily now, eating like someone who remembered hunger too well. Between bites, they spoke of small things and large ones, of past pain and uncertain futures. What would you do first? Ayana asked. If you were truly free, Samuel thought. I'd find water, a river maybe. I'd build a simple house, 4 walls, a door I could lock. I'd sit on the porch every morning and watch the sun rise, knowing no one owned me. And you? He asked. I'd rebuild my grandmother's village. I'd bring my people back, plant corn and beans the old way, teach the songs to children who've never heard them. She paused. But that world is gone, so I stay here and pretend the forest remembers us. Maybe it does, Samuel said quietly. She looked at him, startled by the kindness in his voice. In the firelight, his face looked softer, younger. For a moment she imagined a world where they were just 2 people meeting by chance, without chains or exile or fear. But that world did not exist. You're healing well, she said. Another week or 2 and you'll be able to travel. His eyes dimmed slightly. Where would I go? North, she said. Follow T. E river. Keep moving. There are people who help runaways, with hidden safe places and quiet paths that stay off the maps. It is risky, and many get caught, but it can be done. Have you ever thought about heading north? Every single day, she said after clearing her throat. But like I told you before, this land is my home. I cannot leave it, not even if staying here ends my life. Then that makes 2 of us stubborn enough to die for what we believe in, Samuel said with a crooked, tired smile. After dinner they cleaned everything together without talking much, moving side by side in a calm rhythm that felt natural, almost familiar, even though they had only known each other for a few days. Ayana settled the fire so it would last through the night, while Samuel laid out the furs on his sleeping place. When she turned back toward him, she caught him watching her again, his eyes sharp and searching, as if he were trying to understand her completely. Thank you, he said softly, for everything, for pulling me from the river, for taking care of me, for healing me, for not turning your back on me. Something tightened in Ayana's throat. Do not thank me yet. We are not safe. We will never truly be safe as long as you stay here. I know, he said. Still, thank you. She only nodded, afraid that if she spoke her voice would break, and she moved to her own sleeping place on the other side of the cabin. They lay in the dark, separated by 10 feet of hard-packed earth and a distance that felt even larger, full of danger and things that could never be. Outside, an owl cried out, and another answered somewhere far away. The night slowly wrapped around the cabin like a heavy blanket. Ayana Samu. Elle's voice came quietly through the darkness. Yes, what you said earlier, about choosing to stay and hide, instead of leaving and forgetting everything. I understand it now. You are not hiding from them. You are hiding for yourself, for your grandmother, for your people. You are keeping something alive that they tried to destroy. She closed her eyes as tears burned behind them. That is exactly right. Then maybe what I am doing is not only running, he said after a pause. Maybe I am keeping something alive too. My dignity, my humanity. The part of me they could never own, no matter how hard they tried. Maybe you are, she whispered. They did not speak again that night. But as Ayana slowly drifted into sleep, she felt something she had not felt in 3 long years. She felt less alone. That feeling, as dangerous and impossible as it was, settled around her heart like warmth returning to frozen ground. Somewhere in the dark, Samuel lay awake listening to her steady breathing, and he felt it too. The hunters came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Ayana had dragged Samuel from the river. She was outside collecting wild mushrooms when she heard them. The distant cry of hounds carried on the wind, still far away but moving closer. Her blood went cold. She dropped her basket and ran toward the cabin, her heart pounding hard in her chest. Samuel was sitting near the fire, his shirt off as he checked the nearly healed wound on his chest. He looked up when she burst through the door and instantly saw the fear on her face. "Dogs," she said. He stood up at once, all signs of a quiet morning gone. "How close?" "Maybe a mile, maybe less. They are coming from the east." She rushed to the fire, replaced and scattered the coals, hiding any sign of warmth or smoke. The root cellar. Now. Samuel did not argue. They had planned for this, talked it through again and again, even though a small part of them hoped the day would never come. He pulled on his shirt and crossed to the corner of the cabin where part of the floor lifted up, revealing a narrow space beneath, barely 4 feet deep, dug into the red Georgia clay and lined with stone so it would not cave in. It was meant to store vegetables and dried meat, but today it had another use. Samuel climbed down, and Ayana passed him a water skin and a knife. Their eyes met, and in that short moment 1,000 things were said without words. "If they take me," he said quietly, "tell them you found me here and were going to report me. Do you understand? You do not protect me. You survive. Do not talk like that," she snapped, fear sharpening her voice. "Stay quiet. Do not move. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear." She lowered the wooden panel back into place and quickly covered it with furs and baskets until the floor looked untouched. Then she moved through the cabin, fast and careful, hiding anything that showed 2 people lived there. Samuel's extra cup, the larger food portions, the second sleeping pallet she had made when he complained about his back, all of it vanished into shadows and corners. The hounds were closer now, maybe half a mile. She could hear them clearly, and under their noise, the shouts of men calling to each other. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her dress, ran her fingers through her hair, and forced herself to look like a woman busy with nothing more than simple morning work. She picked up her basket and stepped outside, shutting the door behind her. The morning was painfully beautiful. Clear sky, warm sunlight, birds singing high in the trees. She made herself walk calmly to a small garden and knelt among the bean plants as if she had all the time in the world. She picked a few beans, dropped them into the basket, and waited. The dogs burst through the tree line first, 3 huge bloodhounds with slobbering mouths and wild eyes. They charged into the clearing, baying loudly, and rushed straight for the cabin. Ayana's heart nearly stopped, but she forced herself to stay still, to keep picking beans as if savage dogs showed up in her garden every day. The men came moments later, 4 of them on horseback, dressed in rough clothes and carrying rifles. They reined in at the edge of the clearing, watching everything with sharp, suspicious eyes. The dogs went mad at the cabin door, scratching at the wood and howling. One man climbed down from his horse. He was tall and thin, with a weathered face and cold blue eyes. A star-shaped badge was pinned to his vest, a lawman, or close enough. He walked toward Ayana slowly, one hand resting near his pistol. "Morning, ma'am," he said in a slow Georgia drawl. "Name's Crawford, county sheriff. You live here." Ayana stood up carefully and wiped the dirt from her hands, meeting his stare. "I do." His eyes traveled over her, noting her Cherokee features, her plain dark dress, and the careful way she held herself. "You alone?" "I am." "How long you been here?" "Long enough." He nodded as if confirming his own thoughts. "You know it is illegal for Indians to stay on Georgia land without permission. There was a removal. You were supposed to go west with the rest. I was told I could stay if I kept to myself and caused no trouble," Ayana said smoothly. "A missionary gave me permission. He said as long as I lived quietly, the state would not care about one Cherokee woman." Crawford studied her for a long moment. Behind him, the other men watched the dogs claw at the cabin door. "Your dogs seem very interested in my home," Ayana said calmly. "May I ask why?" "We are tracking a runaway slave," Crawford said flatly. "Escaped about a month ago. Dangerous. Attacked his master's son and nearly killed him. We have followed his trail for weeks. The dogs picked up his scent near the river yesterday and led us here." He gestured at the cabin. "They seem sure he is inside." Ayana forced a confused look. "There is no one there but me. You can look if you like." Crawford's eyes narrowed. "That's so. Then you will not mind if we do?" He nodded, and two men moved toward the cabin with rifles ready. Ayana held her breath but stayed still. The door was kicked open, and the men rushed inside with the dogs. 30 seconds passed. It felt like hours. She heard furniture scraping, baskets being thrown aside, and the sharp crash of her clay water jug breaking. The dogs howled wildly, and Ayana prayed to every spirit she knew that Samuel would stay silent and unseen. At last the men came back out, angry and confused. "Nothing," Crawford once said. "Just her. No sign of anyone else." But the dogs would not stop. One kept circling the same corner of the cabin, scratching and whining where the root cellar was hidden. Crawford noticed, checked the floors. Ayana's blood froze, but her face stayed calm. The men went back inside, stomping and shifting things, listening for hollow sounds. Her fists clenched until her nails cut into her skin. "Find something," one man called. "No," another answered. Ayana stepped forward without thinking, but Crawford grabbed her arm hard. "Stay where you are." She heard the wooden panel lift, heard a man say, "Well, I'll be damned." Then the click of a rifle. "Come on up, boy," a voice called. "Slow now. Hands where we can see them." After a long pause, Samuel's voice came, quiet and tired. "Don't shoot. I'm coming up." He rose from the hole with his hands raised, his face empty and controlled. The men grabbed him at once, slamming him against the cabin wall and tying his wrists. One of them punched him in the stomach for no reason at all, and Ayana jerked against Crawford's grip. "Easy," Crawford said. "Do not make this worse for yourself." They dragged Samuel into the clearing, and for the first time since he surrendered, his eyes met Ayana's. She saw fear there, and apology, and something deeper that made her chest ache. She shook her head slightly, trying to tell him she did not regret saving him, that none of this was his fault. Crawford released her and stepped closer to Samuel, studying him. "You are the one from the Thornton plantation." Samuel: "Right. Heard you broke young James Thornton's jaw and put him in bed for weeks." Samuel said nothing, staring off into the distance. "Cat got your tongue," Crawford sneered. "Or you just do not know how to speak to white men." Still Samuel stayed silent. Crawford's face twisted with anger, and he raised his hand and backhanded Samuel hard. The blow landed across his face, sharp and brutal, hard enough to split his lip. Blood streamed down Samuel's chin, yet he made no sound at all. "You'll talk sooner or later," Crawford said calmly. "Mr. Thornton is offering $200 for your return. He wants to make an example out of you. Truth be told, I hope he takes his sweet time." He glanced at his men. "Tie him to my horse. We're riding back to Milledgeville." As the men moved to follow orders, Crawford shifted his gaze to Ayana. "And as for you, Cherokee, you have plenty to explain. Hiding a fugitive slave is a serious offense. We could hang you for it." "I didn't hide him," Ayana replied, forcing strength into her voice. "I found him in my root cellar this morning. I was going to report it when you arrived." Crawford laughed, a harsh and ugly sound. "Is that so? Then explain why the dogs tracked his scent all through your cabin. Explain the bloody bandages tossed in the corner. Explain why you've stored enough food for 2 people. Ayana's thoughts raced. He must have broken in while I was out gathering herbs. I'm gone for hours sometimes. "He could have saved it," Crawford cut in. "I wasn't born yesterday. You've been hiding him for weeks, nursing him, feeding him. The question is why? What does a Cherokee woman want with a runaway Negro?" "Nothing," Ayana said. "I wanted nothing." Crawford spat on the dirt. "Just what then? Feeling generous? More likely you two were sharing more than meals. Maybe you warmed his bed while he healed." Rage flared inside Ayana, hot and fierce, but she swallowed it. Anger would only worsen things. "Think whatever you want," she said flatly. "I've told you the truth. What you believe is your choice." Crawford studied her for a long moment, weighing his decision. At last he shook his head. "You're lucky. I don't like dragging a Cherokee woman to trial. Too much trouble, and the state wouldn't care anyway. But listen carefully." He stepped closer until his face was inches from hers. "You stay out of sight. You don't help runaways. You don't cause trouble. If I hear your name again, if anyone reports you for anything, I'll come back and burn this cabin down with you inside. Understand?" Ayanna nodded, unable to trust her voice. Crawford mounted his horse, and his men followed, dragging Samuel behind them like an animal. His hands were tied, a rope looped around his neck and fastened to Crawford's saddle. One strong kick from the horse would choke the life out of him. As they prepared to leave, Samuel looked back at Ayanna one last time. Their eyes met across the clearing, and in that instant she saw everything they had built in 3 short weeks. The quiet talks, the shared meals, the growing trust, and something deeper they never dared to name. She saw it all, and she saw it ending. "I'm sorry," he mouthed silently. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "Live," she mouthed back. "Just live." Crawford kicked his horse forward, and Samuel was yanked ahead, stumbling but staying upright. The other riders followed, dogs running beside them, until they vanished into the forest, heading east toward Milledgeville and whatever horrors waited there. Ayanna stood alone in the clearing long after they were gone, her body trembling as she held back sobs. She had known this day would come. From the moment she pulled him from the river, she knew it could only end this way. Knowing it, though, did nothing to dull the pain. At last, she forced herself to move. She stepped into a cabin, roughed the shattered door, and took in the wreckage. Pottery smashed, blankets torn, herbs scattered across the floor. But the deepest wound lay in the corner, where the root cellar panel stood open like a gash. She knelt and stared into the empty space where Samuel had hidden, and something inside her finally gave way. She dropped to her knees and wept. She wept for Samuel, for the torture and death that likely waited for him. She wept for herself, for the brief bond that had been ripped away. She wept for her brother, her family, her people, and for everyone who had ever hoped for freedom, only to be crushed. When the tears finally stopped and the sun slid across the sky, Ayanna rose. She wiped her face, squared her shoulders, and began to clean. That was what survivors did. They endured, they rebuilt, they went on. As she worked, one thought kept circling, growing stronger. Samuel was still alive. They were taking him to Thornton's plantation, which meant he had a few days at most. A few days could be enough. Enough for what, she did not yet know. But she knew one thing clearly. She had not saved him from the river just to let him die in chains. She had told him to live. Now she would make sure he could. When night fell over the Georgia woods, Ayanna stood in her doorway, staring east toward Milledgeville. Somewhere that way, Samuel was being dragged back into hell. And somewhere deep inside her, a decision hardened into certainty. She could not save everyone. She could not undo the past. But maybe she could save one man, even if it cost her life. She left at first light with only a knife, a water skin, and a small pouch of dried venison. Dressed in dark clothing, she moved through the forest like a shadow, using every lesson her grandmother had taught her about silence and tracking. She knew where they were headed. The Thornton plantation lay nearly 70 miles southeast, a journey that would take the hunters at least 3 days with a captive on foot. She had perhaps 2 days to get ahead of them. She ran when she could, her steps quiet. When exhaustion set in, she walked, pushing past the pain in her legs and the fire in her lungs. She followed deer paths and creek beds, avoiding roads and towns, staying parallel to the route the hunters would take. By nightfall of the first day, she had covered nearly 30 miles. She slept 3 hours in a hollow log, then moved again before dawn. The second day was worse. Her muscles ached, her feet blistered, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. Still, she pressed on, driven by something she could not fully explain. She barely knew Samuel. 3 weeks together was nothing. Risking her life for him made no sense. But nothing about the past weeks had made sense. Nothing had since soldiers drove her people away. She stopped judging her choices by reason and judged them by what she could live with. And she could not live with leaving Samuel to die. By evening of the second day, she reached the outskirts of Mon. The city was larger than she expected, busy and crowded, with brick buildings and more white faces than she had seen in years. She stayed on the edges until she found a small encampment of enslaved people near a plantation, their cabins separated from the main house by a cotton field. She waited until darkness, then crept closer, listening. She needed answers. Where Thornton's plantation was, how it was guarded, where Samuel would be held. Approaching strangers was dangerous. One word to the wrong person and she was dead. At last she noticed an elderly woman sitting alone outside a cabin, smoking a pipe and humming softly. Ayana watched her for several minutes, then stepped from the shadows slowly. The woman froze, eyes wide. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "You Cherokee, ain't you?" Ayana nodded. "I need help." The woman glanced around nervously. "Child, do you know how dangerous it is for you here? If white folks catch you—" "I know," Ayana said, "but I need information about the Thornton plantation." The woman studied her, then understanding crossed her face. "This about that runaway they caught. Samuel." Ayana's heart jumped. "You know him?" "Everyone does. Word spreads fast. They say he almost killed James Thornton when he ran. They're planning to make an example of him." She shook her head. "Brave man." "Foolish, maybe, but brave. I need to get him out," Ayana said. The woman's eyes widened. "Child, that place is a fortress. Guards, dogs, overseers. Even if you got inside, you wouldn't come out alive. I have to try." "Why?" the woman asked quietly. Ayana paused. "He's someone worth saving." The woman stared, then shook her head in awe. "You're either the bravest soul I've met or the craziest." She took a long pull from her pipe. "All right. I'll tell you what I know, but understand this could kill you both." "I understand." The woman explained everything. The layout of the plantation, the guard routines, the punishment house where Samuel would likely be kept. She drew a rough map in the dirt, pointing out blind spots and shift changes. "They'll hold him a few days," she said. "Thornton likes fear to build. Your best chance is before they move him where everyone can see." "How much time do I have?" "Crawford left this place yesterday morning with Samuel. They should arrive at the plantation tomorrow, likely by midday. That means you may have only one night to do whatever you are planning." The woman tightened her grip on Ayana's arm. "Listen carefully. If you do this, if you manage to free him, you can never stop running. They will chase both of you to the very ends of the earth. Do you understand that?" "I do." "Where will you go?" "North," Ayana said. "As far as our legs can carry us." The woman gave a slow nod. "Then may God walk with you, child. You will need every bit of help you can find." She hesitated, then asked, "What is your name?" "Ayana." "Ayana," she repeated softly. "I will remember it. And if you survive, if you somehow succeed in doing this impossible thing, know that your story will travel far. We will speak it in the quarters, pass it along the roads, whisper it in the fields. We will tell of the Cherokee woman who saved the runaway, of two people who refused to accept their chains. That story will give others hope, and hope is the one thing they can never steal from us." Ayana felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Save that man first, then thank me." Ayana left the encampment and headed toward the Thornton plantation, reaching it just after midnight. Everything looked exactly as the old woman had said. A huge main house sat on a hill, surrounded by cotton fields stretching all the way to the horizon. Barns, storage sheds, and slave quarters were scattered across the land, and she could see the orange light of torches as guards moved through their patrols. She circled the property twice, fixing every detail in her mind, ever. The guard's path, every possible danger. The punishment house stood apart from the others, a small stone building near the main house but isolated from everything else. That was where Samuel would be kept, close enough for Thornton to enjoy his suffering, far enough that his screams would not disturb the others. Ayana waited until 3 in the morning, when exhaustion made the guards careless and their movements predictable. Then she acted. She crawled across the cotton field on her stomach, inch by inch through the plants, her dark clothes blending into the shadows of the moonlight. It took nearly an hour to cross 200 yards, but at last she reached the edge of the compound. The punishment house was about 50 feet away. One guard sat outside the door with his rifle resting across his knees, his head drooping as sleep pulled at him. Ayana picked up a small stone and tossed it into the bushes about 20 feet to her left. The guard snapped awake and stood, staring into the darkness. When he stepped away from the door to check the sound, Ayana ran. She crossed the open ground in seconds, pressed herself flat against the stone wall, and held her breath. The guard muttered something about animals and returned to his seat. She waited until his breathing grew slow and heavy again, then slipped quietly around to the back of the building. There was a small window barred with iron, just large enough for her to peer inside. She leaned close and whispered, "Samuel." For a moment there was nothing. Then a shape moved in the darkness, and Samuel's face appeared in the pale moonlight. His eyes widened in shock. "Ayanna," he whispered, "what are you doing here? They will kill you." "And we do not have much time," she said. She studied the bars. They were sunk deep into the stone and could not be removed without noise. "Is there another way out?" "The door," he said, "but it is locked and guarded." Ayanna thought quickly. "Can you reach this window if I give you a knife?" "Why?" "I'm going to distract the guard. When he leaves his post, you cut the rope or chain holding the door and run. Head west into the cotton field. I will meet you there." "Ayanna, this is madness. You will never survive. Do you want to live or not?" She slid her knife through the bars. Their fingers brushed for a brief second, and even in that moment of fear, she felt the spark between them. "Trust me." Samuel took the knife, holding her gaze. "If this fails—" "It will not," she said, hoping her voice sounded stronger than she felt. "Be ready." She moved back toward the front of the building. The guard was still slumped in his chair, his rifle loose in his hands. Ayanna gathered several larger stones and crept toward the nearest barn, about 100 feet away. She hurled the first stone onto the tin roof, sending a sharp clang echoing across the plantation. The guard jumped up, lifting his rifle. "Who is there?" She threw another stone, then another, making it sound like someone moving behind the barn. The guard hesitated, torn between staying and investigating. At last he chose to move, walking toward the barn while shouting warnings. The instant he disappeared from view, Ayanna ran back to the punishment house. She heard Samuel working desperately at the door, the knife slicing through rope. Every sound felt too loud in the still night. She kept glancing back, expecting the guard to return at any moment. The door burst open and Samuel stepped out, stiff but fast. Ayanna grabbed his hand, and they sprinted toward the cotton field. Behind them, the guard shouted when he saw the open door. Bells rang across the plantation. Men yelled and dogs began to bay. "Faster," Ayanna urged, pulling Samuel deeper into the field. They ran bent low, weaving through the plants to confuse the dogs. Samuel was hurt and weak, but fear pushed him forward. They could hear horses, barking dogs, and men with torches spreading out behind them. At the edge of the land, they plunged into the forest. Ayanna led them to a creek she had scouted earlier, and they waded upstream for nearly a mile. The icy water soaked them, but it would hide their scent. Only when she was sure they had gained enough distance did she let them stop. They collapsed on the creek bank, gasping for air. Samuel looked at her in the moonlight, his face filled with disbelief and something deeper. "You came for me," he said softly. "Of course I did," she replied, her body shaking as the fear drained away. "Did you think I would let them kill you? I thought—" He shook his head. "I thought I would never see you again." They stared at each other, and in that instant, everything shifted. Without planning it, they kissed, tasting river water, fear, and overwhelming relief. It lasted only seconds, but when they pulled apart, they both knew something had changed forever. "We have to keep going," Ayanna said, her voice unsteady. "They will not stop looking." Samuel nodded and squeezed her hand. "Thank you, for my life. Thank me when we are safe," she said, squeezing back. They continued north through the darkness, hand in hand, two fugitives carrying nothing but each other and a fragile hope of freedom. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded as the dogs lost their trail in the creek. They had gained time, and now they had to use it wisely. As dawn rose over the Georgia hills, painting the sky with pink and gold, Ayanna and Samuel finally rested. They found a small cave hidden among rocks and collapsed inside, their bodies pressed together for warmth, their breathing slowly matching. "Where do we go now?" Samuel asked quietly. "North," Ayanna said, repeating her promise. "We follow the river through Tennessee, maybe all the way to Ohio. There are people who help runaways, safe places, secret paths. It will be dangerous, but it can be done. What about your home, your cabin in the woods?" Ayanna was silent for a long time. "That was not home," she finally said. "It was only a place where I survived. Home is wherever we choose to build it together." Samuel pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Outside, the world searched for them, but for now they were safe. They were together, and that was enough. "I love you," Samuel whispered. Ayana closed her eyes as tears slid down her face. "I love you too." They fell asleep like that, two broken souls finding wholeness in each other, two outcasts who had become family. When they woke hours later, they would continue north toward an uncertain future they would face side by side. Because love, Ayana realized, was not the absence of danger, but the choice to face it with someone beside you. And for the first time in 3 years, she was no longer alone. 3 months passed as they fled through the mountains of Tennessee and across the rolling hills of Kentucky. Always north, always just ahead of the slave catchers who never stopped hunting them. Samuel's face appeared on wanted notices in every town, the reward rising to $500, dead or alive. Ayana faded into the background beside him, just another Cherokee woman displaced by removal, unnoticed unless someone looked closely and saw how they moved as one, how their hands found each other in crowds, how their eyes spoke without words. They lived on fish from streams, rabbits caught in snares, berries and roots Ayana recognized from her grandmother's teachings. They slept in caves, abandoned barns, beneath bridges, and inside the hollows of giant trees. Some nights they went to sleep hungry, their stomachs aching. Other nights they ate well, and Samuel made Ayana laugh with stories from before Thornton, before the plantation, when he was only a boy chasing fireflies and climbing trees. Help came from unexpected places. A Quaker family fed them and wrapped them in warm blankets. An old freed man let them sleep in his barn without questions. A Cherokee family in Tennessee recognized Ayana and hid them for a week. But they also began to see danger everywhere they went. Twice they barely escaped slave catchers who were hunting for runaways. One time Samuel fought off 3 men who tried to claim the reward on him, using every bit of strength he had left. Another time, Ayana killed a man with her grandmother's knife when he tried to drag Samuel away while she was gathering water from a stream. She had never taken a life before. The weight of it stayed inside her, heavy and cold, and it made her dreams darker and more frightening. But Samuel held her through those long nights and whispered that she had saved both of them. He told her that violence used to protect love was not the same as violence born from hate. By the time they reached the Ohio River, it was late January of 1848. The river was partly frozen, with huge pieces of ice floating like white islands on the dark moving water. Ohio lay on the far side, free land, where slavery was against the law, where Samuel could live without chains or fear. They stood on the Kentucky bank, staring across at freedom so close they felt they could almost touch it. "We could cross," Samuel said, his breath rising in pale clouds in the cold air. "We could reach Ohio, find the Underground Railroad, and maybe even make it all the way to Canada." Ayana looked at him, at this man who had become her entire world in only a few months. His face was thinner now, shaped by hunger and struggle, but his eyes were bright with something she had never seen in him before. Hope, true hope. Not the desperate hope that pushed them to keep running, but the kind that lets you imagine tomorrow and the days beyond it. "We could," she said softly. "But is that what you really want? To keep running forever, to always watch your back, to live with the fear that someone will recognize you and send you back?" Samuel frowned. "Then what choice do we have?" Ayana turned and looked south, back the way they had come. "The old woman at the plantation, the one who helped me," she said. "She told me about a hidden valley, a place beyond the Oconee River where fugitives and outcasts go to disappear, a place no white man dares to enter, a place where Cherokee people and escaped slaves live together, refusing all the laws meant to keep us apart." Samuel studied her carefully. "Do you think a place like that is real?" "I think that even if it isn't," Ayana said, taking his hands in hers, "we could make it real. We could go back, Samuel, not to Thornton's land, not anywhere they would think to search, but deep into the Georgia wilderness, where even hunters are afraid to go. We could find that valley, or one like it, and build something there, a life, a home. Maybe others like us would find it too, people who are tired of running." Samuel searched her face for a long moment. "You mean this? You're serious?" "I have never been more serious about anything," she said. The certainty hardened inside her like stone. "I ran from removal because I could not leave my homeland. For 3 years I survived alone because I could not abandon the land my people lived on for thousands of years. Then I met you, and I left anyway, because you mattered more than the land. But what if we don't have to choose? What if we can have each other, and a home too? "It's dangerous," Samuel said quietly. "More dangerous than crossing into Ohio." "Maybe," Ayanna replied. "But it is our land, Samuel, yours by birth and mine by inheritance. No one has the right to tell us we cannot live there together." Samuel was silent for a long time, thinking. Then slowly a smile spread across his face. Not the careful smile she had grown used to, but something wide and bright that changed his whole expression. "A hidden valley," he said, "where mercy turns into defiance and defiance turns into love." "Yes," Ayanna said, smiling back at him. "Exactly that." They did not cross the Ohio River that day. Instead, they turned south, back toward Georgia, back toward home. The journey back was even harder than the one north. They were worn down, almost out of supplies, and winter turned every day into a fight against cold and hunger. But now they had purpose. They had a destination that belonged only to them. It took 6 weeks to return to Georgia, moving carefully, avoiding towns and plantations, following paths only Ayanna knew. They reached the